Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dynamic Lifestyle Podcast. We have our guest, Danny Lennon from Ireland. Danny, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, guys. I'm hiding behind the mic here, so apologies if can't see me too good. But yeah, it's awesome to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
No worries, no worries. And guys, I was telling Danny right before the show started, all of us have something in common. We all have really, really great eyebrows. So just be aware when you see the video.
People be loving it.
Exactly. Okay, Danny. So we like starting off the show, just pretty much having our guests tell their story and anything you'd like to tell us about. So, who is Danny Lennon?
Sure. So in short, for right now, I'm the founder of Sigma Nutrition. So we're a company that has really two branches. One is that we provide evidence-based nutrition information in an educational manner. So we obviously have the podcast, blogs, online content that we put out via video, and then also in-person seminars. And then the second branch would be our coaching service, where we again work one-on-one with people with either the nutrition or their strength and conditioning or powerlifting programming. So we have a number of coaches on board now. More on my personal side, my background is I have a master's degree in nutritional sciences from University College Cork, and I have an undergrad degree in physics and biology education. And so that's the kind of Cliff Notes version to keep it short and sweet.
Gotcha.
Nice. So I know I listen to your podcast pretty frequently, and I think I caught one time that you said that you used to teach. Is that correct?
Yeah, so after my initial undergrad degree, I'd actually done a teaching diploma during that degree as well. And so I spent a year teaching in a high school here in Ireland, teaching physics and biology. But it was during that time then that I would really to myself, I was kept reading a lot about nutrition and performance, trying to just do that for my own kind of athletic aspirations. I just kind of got more interested in that route and decided to go back to university after that year of teaching and get a master's in nutrition and just go my own route. Just decided it was suited more to me than working in the school system here. But I love the actual teaching component of that and the educational piece. It was more just being within that system probably wasn't suited to me as a person. And I found entrepreneurship to be a better route for me. But I did learn a ton of skills in terms of relaying educational material during that time that I think has stood me in good stead. So yeah, that's the kind of route I've taken.
Yeah, that's actually good you actually mentioned that, because I was going to ask what the driving force was from you to go from teaching to starting your own business, starting the podcast, everything like that. So I'm glad you really touched on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it was just seeing what I was suited to, not only my skill set, but just kind of the preferences, what I knew was something that not only I was good at, but I would be more interested in, and just kind of being true to what I knew was going to be useful to me. And I just knew that there was something about working within some other system that wasn't right for me. And then this idea of maybe going my own route was something that maybe appealed more to me. And at the time I was kind of I was lucky in the fact that I just came to the end of a 1-year contract with that school. And so I had the 3-month break that we have here during the summer, where I obviously didn't have work because there was no school on. So time to think about anything before a new job offer came through. And so I decided, because I didn't have a permanent contract in place, now was the time, if I was ever going to do it, to take that chance. And so that's what kind of pushed me to, well, I'll try it now. And worst comes to worst, I can always transition back into this. And so I often think sometimes, would I have been maybe as brave to go and do that if I had been on a full-time contract, like guaranteed permanent position like so many other people, to actually leave that. But it just worked out that way for me, and in the end it was probably one of the best things to ever happen. So it all worked out in the end.
That's awesome.
Gotcha. So, Chris and I, were inspired by your podcast to start ours. But
Absolutely.
Before we even did this, we had listened to, so many different people's podcasts, like, Lewis House, Tim Ferriss, your guys' Lanes. There's so many other good ones out there, and there's so many bad ones, in my opinion. So, my question is, first off, we did our research. We waited until we understood what kind of element we could bring to a podcast, what different dynamic, and how we could kind of separate ourselves from others. So my question is, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that is wanting to get into the podcast game, and what mistakes did you make when you started off with yours?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think probably it's easiest to start with the mistakes, because then we can kind of steer towards more of the stuff I learned from that. I think probably initially I just wanted to do it because I was really interested into in podcasting. Before it is probably as big as it is now, I always loved to listen to other podcasts, and I've done so for quite a period of time. And so when I was setting up Sigma Nutrition, I thought in terms of one of the ways to put out good content, that would be one of the mediums I would try. And it was only really once I started doing that pretty early on, I saw that it was really suited to my own skill set and my preference. And so I just doubled down on that and kind of pulled back a bit on writing articles or YouTube, which other people are better on. I just found the audio medium suited me well. But initially, I suppose I didn't have the same direction in terms of where the content was focused as I do now, in that I was just jumping from topic to topic without really considering who the end listener would be. And I was only thinking about just stuff I would be interested in. Now, that's not a bad way to go, but I think now, just as a product of getting feedback from people who listen to the show regularly, hearing their emails, seeing what people respond well to, I have a really good idea of who that listener base is now. And so I kind of know what content is suited towards them. And so it's a kind of combination of maybe experience of working out who those people are. But if people can get an idea of that before they start, they're probably starting on a better idea, and they're probably already half the way down that route. And so that's a probably combination of research beforehand, but even just thinking about who the avatar is of that type of person they want to go after. And so, for example, people know if they do listen to my podcast, it's not really one that if someone's just interested in starting their journey on how to eat a bit healthier, that they're probably not really going to get much from mine. Like, my podcast won't be much help to that person. It's just going to be maybe too confusing. It goes into in-depth topics on some science things that really aren't all that applicable to that person at that time. And so there's so many other podcasts that be way more helpful to those people. Whereas people at a more intermediate to advanced level of knowledge, maybe they're a coach, or maybe they're helping other people, or maybe they have some scientific background, then they do find the content interesting. And so it's knowing where that line is and focusing on one type of person. Then on the actual delivery of the podcast, I would say the things that I've tried to make a real conscious effort on that I think have made a huge difference is in the line of questioning, in that, number one, trying to not make it too vague and general with the questions. I mean, no matter how good an expert you have on, if I come them on and say something like, well, can you tell me what a good diet is, or how should people eat, right? It's just such a vague question. There's no direction for them to follow, and it's just really not helpful to that person. So the more focused you can become is also helpful for the interviewee, but it's also more so it directs it along a specific path, and you can really dig into one specific topic. And so that's where I've gone with it. I think also I'll leave it at one more thing, is trying not to have stuff super scripted out all the time. Or even if someone has, so generally what I will do is have a bullet point list of maybe some ideas for questions, but some topics to really touch on, but also be willing to adapt during the conversation of stuff that just comes up organically. And so hopefully one of the things people get from my podcast is that it does have a kind of natural flow, I think, and some of the questions have built on follow-ups to something that someone has said that I didn't realize they were going to say. So just being not too rigid and being willing to do that, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and thank you so much for sharing those. I mean, you hit it just on the head right there. That it has to flow, and you have to be able to adapt within the conversation. And I think a big component is actually listening to the guests. Sometimes you can just get caught off guard, or you just get distracted, but you really have to pay attention as an interviewer, and that's something we've learned along the way too. So, yeah, thanks so much. And really quick, how long ago did you start your podcast?
The first podcast came out I think the first or second week of April 2014.
Oh, wow.
So probably coming up close to 2.5 years now.
You're an experienced veteran, man.
Getting there, yeah. So
we're newbies over here.
It takes that time, and that's what I suppose surprises people, because I remember even like a year ago, the podcast had started to grow really, really well at that stage, and a lot more people were hearing about it. And a few people had said like, oh, this has kind of grown super fast. It's kind of come out of nowhere. It's like, well, this has been around for the last year, it's taken a while for you guys to hear about it. Absolutely. And so that's something we'll probably touch on later. But in general, I think having that patience with something if you know it's good, it's just a matter of time to have the patience to see it through, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said about you kind of knew that audio was, that specialty that you could bring to the table, because I think a good learning point right here is for anybody that's aspiring to try to do a podcast, trying to do a YouTube channel, a blog, you guys got to first of all experiment with, different mediums, see where your strengths are. And it's like what Gary Vee says. I don't know if you follow Gary Vaynerchuk, but he says, double down on your strengths, punt your weaknesses. So that's exactly what you did. You doubled down on the audio part, punt some of the weaknesses. So I like that. It's great.
Yeah, and it's just something I've seen because it's not to, because I think a lot of the time people might see podcasts doing really well and then get this idea that they need to be doing it, that podcasting is this hot thing now, I have to be doing it. And that's just not true, right? So I look around at all the people within the fitness industry that I see being super successful, and each of them are doing so because they're sticking to one thing they're good at, right? So, for example, you take Greg Knuckles, right? He's just going to write the best articles there is. Right. And that's what he spends nearly all his time doing, putting out these amazing pieces of content, his articles, his books. And he doesn't need to go start a podcast right now. I don't know if he's going to, or right now he doesn't need to, right? Because he can spend his time doing on something he's really good at. Other people have amazing YouTube channels that people really engage with that video content. And it's not to say people can't do more than one or the other, but it's just realizing you only have a finite amount of time and resources to put into it. So just understanding what is suited best to not only what you like doing, but where your skills lie and where you're able to convey them the best, I think is really important.
Right. I love that. All right. So switching gears. So what is the biggest surprise you've experienced as an entrepreneur so far?
Yeah, this is a really cool question because I think for me, perhaps the most surprising thing was to realize that I wasn't in competition with people who were doing similar things. Because of starting out, I think oftentimes we think that of if we're setting up something that's maybe in a similar area to someone else or doing a similar type of thing. So for me, would me starting a nutrition podcast mean I'm competing against other people doing nutrition or training podcasts? Like logically, people initially might think that, right? But I think I found the complete opposite. And it's the same way, I think the best way I heard it related to me was it's the same idea with a book, right? If you write a book on training, you're not competing with every other person who's written a book on training, because we know everyone that's going to read that book is going to read tons of books anyway. Yeah. And it's the same I found with podcasting, right? People listen to a number of different podcasts. And generally, if people like podcasts, they listen to loads of them. And so I've found that the opposite is that, and then plus there's just such an abundance of people out there to help, especially now with the power of the internet. It's not me needing to try and reach everyone or to get everyone, and it's just not going to work that way. What it's a more matter of is me, as well as you guys and everyone else that we know in the fitness industry that's putting out evidence-based, good quality information. We don't need everyone to be listening to us, because each of those people will respond better differently to each one of us, and that's okay. Some people will resonate with the way you guys relay the information and love you guys, and just won't really get the way I put it across. Right. And then the vice versa. Some people will like the way I do it, or the way Greg does it, or the way Eric Helms puts out. And so you're not in competition with any of these people. So what I found is the opposite. Instead of trying to compete with people, trying to help others as much as possible, and to focus on just making my work the best I can for the people who like my stuff. And that was a huge realization for me, because I think it's so easy to try and get caught up into keeping to yourself and not spreading ideas or not talking to other people about what you're doing. And really, it's the complete opposite. When you start opening up and doing that is when your business grows faster than you'd even realize.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, man, because with Eric and I, we've always said that we don't look at people as competition. We're inspired by you guys, like, Eric Helms, Lane, Greg Knuckles, Brad, Allen. I mean, you guys are all intelligent people. You know what I mean? So it's like we want to learn from everybody. That's why we have people do guest articles, why we do podcast interviews, why we have the best fitness reads like a month where we share people's articles, right? Because we're trying to get the best information out. We're trying to learn too. We're students as well. So yeah, I think that was great.
And I mean, I think people get that when they see someone referring to someone else has done a good piece, or so-and-so is an expert in this area. That's a kind of sign that, okay, this person is trustworthy, that they know what they're talking about. It's the guy that says that they know everything and they are the authority in every single area, and they don't talk about anyone else's work. That's almost like a red flag to me. It's like, how can this person claim to know everything better than anyone else and never give credit to anyone else's work, right? Yeah. It just doesn't happen. And so they're the types of like these guru type people that we need to kind of stay away from, because it's not it's not a sign that you're ethical or evidence-based if you are the authority in every single area.
Right. Yeah, those are definitely the people that are the problem with the fitness industry. But like you said, you just have to
Right.
stay away from them and just stick to your core values, your integrity, and the way you do things.
Right, for
So
sure.
let's shift gears here. So we know life is full of adversities. It's a journey. It's a roller coaster. So my question is, what was the lowest point in your life, and how did you overcome that and kind of utilize it and turn it into a blessing in disguise
Mm.
instead of letting it defeat you?
Yeah, I suppose for me, the easiest one to think of straight off the bat was probably if we talk career-wise, what we talked about earlier with the teaching is that I'd obviously spent 4 years going through college and then another year of my life teaching. And all through that 5 years, and probably a couple of years before that, before I'd got into college, with this kind of mindset that, yeah, what I was going to do with my life is I was going to be a teacher. This is where I was going to be, and have that almost like that career spanned out for all this time.
Right.
And then suddenly you start doing this, and then 6 months into it, realize, wow, actually, my personality is completely different to what this job requires, and I might be better off doing something completely different. And so I'd been thinking a certain way for 7 years of what my life was going to be, and now it's suddenly like, okay, it's not going to be that at all, or you're going to have to just make do with something that you know you're not really happy with. And so that was kind of, I don't know if it was, I could judge it as a super low point in that it was more a feeling of just being in some way maybe a bit scared and a bit lost of, well, what do I do? Do I actually just go all out and go for this? And so, like we touched on earlier, it ended up being a great decision that I decided to leave teaching and just going my own route, deciding to go and get my master's and pursue this nutrition thing myself and go on through a route of entrepreneurship. And so I think that kind of taught me that you don't need to have everything mapped out. And oftentimes I've come around to the idea that trying to map things out in the super long term is in fact the worst thing to do. And so I kind of often joke with friends at the moment that I'm probably the worst person for any long-term planning. Like I think like 3 months time, I could be doing anything and I could be living anywhere. And obviously that's not what everyone should be doing or aspiring to do. But I've kind of gone away from the idea of having to need a plan of exactly where I'm going to be in 10 years or 5 years, because not only can't you not predict what's going to go on in that time frame, one thing that's really struck me is that if you think about what type of person you are every year. So the type of person I was 12 months ago or 24 months ago or 36 months ago, I was literally a different person, right? So what that person 3 years ago would have liked and enjoyed doing with their life is not what the person that I am now is. So in 3 years' time, whatever person I end up becoming might have different interests and goals or wherever. So there's no point me trying to plan so far ahead for that person, right? And that's obviously within reason. There are certain things you can plan long term for, but I think that was the kind of realization for me. But it was just quite a shock at the time, the fact that I'd been have this mindset for, like I say, 6, 7 years of this is what my life was going to look like, and then suddenly realize, hey, you better go back and start from scratch here.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting how you said that, you figured out that wasn't your personality, that didn't suit you, so you kind of changed gears. And I have
Right.
a good buddy that I went to school with when we were doing our undergrad work, and he was an accountant major, and the whole time I was thinking, there's no way this guy could be an accountant. Like, he's just too energetic. He's a people person. He needs to go out and connect with people. He's got a great personality. No offense to accountants. Accountants have great personalities, I'm sure. But yeah, I never saw that in him. And then he just flipped a switch. He just changed directions, and now he's doing great. But it's interesting how that works.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen like two of my closest friends. They actually both run gyms now at the moment, and they're really good people person. They love training, but they love that interaction with clients. And previously, before they'd set up their facilities, one was studying to be an engineer, and the other one was a junior accountant working in an accountancy firm. And then you just see their stories of once they left and start these facilities, and suddenly, because they're happy doing that, what's drove them on to be so successful. And now they just have amazing gym facilities and are loving life. So
Yeah,
it's surprising how common that happens when people do take that step.
exactly.
Cool. Yeah. So keeping on this question, if we have the listeners visualize, somebody standing on a ledge of a cliff, and then on the bottom of the cliff is that risk they want to take, entrepreneurship. that thing that excites them the most, that they're passionate about. But when they're standing on the ledge, we'll take you for example. That's where you were teaching your physics class, and then if you go down, you jump off the ledge. That's where you're jumping into Sigma Nutrition, taking that entrepreneurship route. So if you could travel back when you were first on that ledge, what's one piece of advice you can give to somebody that's standing on that ledge that's afraid to jump down?
I would probably say that it's hard for me to say that it's not going to be as bad as you might think, but I think the better way to do it is actually an exercise. I remember, if I remember correctly, I think it was in the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. One of the things he has is a visualization of the worst possible case scenario as opposed to visualizing positivity all the time. So one exercise he would have is this thing you're planning that you in your head it thinks is a big risk. Map out exactly what the absolute worst case scenario can possibly be. Like the worst thing, if you do this, what's the worst thing that will happen? And then from that, once you get really detailed about it, then start thinking, okay, from that worst bottom point that I could potentially reach, how long would it take and what steps would I have to take to get back to where I currently am now? And then what does that entail? And so usually when people map it out, they see, number one, the chances of that worst case scenario happening are actually pretty slim. And then secondly, to actually get back to their baseline doesn't take all that much effort. So for example, someone's planning on starting a business, and the big risk for them is, okay, if this doesn't work out, then I would have plowed in all these savings that I've got. I would have lost the money that I've now saved up. That's gone. And then therefore I can't afford my rent. So then his thing is, okay, to get back to where you are now, what does that need to happen? So the first thing is, okay, you map out the steps you need to take. Okay, first is I'll probably have to move back in with my parents for 6 months, or I'll stay with a buddy for 6 months. I'll get a second extra job, build up some cash, cut back on my spending a bit, save some money until 6 months or 8 months down the road after living on a buddy's couch. I've got money then for rent and to start saving and get back to where I am. And then usually people see that it's actually for the potential upside of completely changing your whole life. Even if that doesn't work out and the worst possible thing happens is, yeah, it takes you 6 or 8 months to get back on your feet and start at where you are now, which is already kind of unhappy if you're not going to take that risk. So again, there's probably much better examples in the actual book, but that idea to me of trying to map out just what could happen, of realizing, number one, it's probably not going to happen, that it's very slim that the worst thing will happen. Number two, if you needed to, you can get back on your feet. It's not the end of the world. It's not disaster. There's nothing like super bad happening to a family member or anything. It's like you can get back from it. And then three is like the potential upside for that potential downside is probably worth it. And so that's what I would say to myself back in that situation.
Yeah, I love that.
And just to kind of add to that question, like what are like 2 to 3 bullet points or, just pieces of advice that you could add to like a fitness entrepreneur, specifically one trying to become an online coach, because that is something that's just really just like, hot these days to become.
Yeah. Trying to keep it to one thing. Let me try and put a few of the things together. I would say if I could try and sum up maybe like in a sentence or two, the few things that you need is, one is consistently putting out high quality work into the world. So like you can put all the effort and time you want into something, but again, at the end of the day, the work still has to be good. So making sure it's actually good quality work. Second, that actually has to help people. And then the third component is just being patient enough to do it for long enough that you'll succeed. And so you need all three of those things. So if you don't have one of them, you're not going to have it. So it has to be consistent, has to be high quality work. It has to actually help people in some way. And then you just have to be patient enough to do it for long enough. And then everything else would probably fit in under that umbrella of that statement, I'd say.
Love it.
Spot on. I couldn't agree more with those three. All right, Danny, so we're going to shift into what we call rapid dynamic questions. So these are kind of like rapid fire questions. So the first one is basically, what are you doing currently right now, self-development wise?
This is actually a really recent one, so I'm not too far into this, is starting an accountability group. And this was actually something that I've decided to finally do, that I've heard often, obviously, about before, but had never really done it for myself enough until actually a client of mine only last week during one of his check-ins with me was talking about he had not only done it for his training with a group of friends and mentors, but also does it on a monthly basis for his own work life. So he's a pretty high-performing work life, and where he will send an accountability email to these people that they're waiting to hear what he's been doing, why he didn't do what he planned to do, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's something I've just set up myself only recently, of getting a few people that I trust, either in a mentoring capacity, and friends that I know will not kind of BS me and keep me honest with stuff, and having me report to them, or I'll just copy them in an email, and that they're expecting an email at a certain time. So that is something that I think everyone needs some degree of accountability. I know from obviously the clients that I have, one of their things that drives them the most is having accountability. And the same thing, we all need that as well. So that is one thing I've been working on at the moment.
What are your 3 current non-negotiables right now in life?
So I've tried to do this. I tried to think about it when I was setting up Sigma Nutrition, of where I wanted to be this in the long term, of in terms of decision making. So if I was offered an opportunity to work on certain type of project or take on certain type of work from this, what would be a yes and what would be a no, and what would I allocate my time to? So one was the idea that I wouldn't be tied to geography, so that I could essentially get to the point where I could just take my laptop, a Wi-Fi connection, and be able to work from wherever I wanted in the world. And the company kind of at that point now where I'm not tied to a specific place if I don't need to be. I didn't want to be tied to a strict timetable where I have to be in a certain location at a certain time. And then I didn't want to be tied to someone else's time more specifically, so that we've moved more of everything we execute is now more on a time frame that I either know is coming or can wait for a certain response. So a very basic example with client check-ins now, as opposed to having set blocks times where I'm waiting for someone to call, or we're going to have to set up a certain time and we are exchanging emails back and forth to try and arrange this. We'll now do it via an email check-in on a Sunday, where they're going to get a response sometime on a Monday. So that for me means that I don't necessarily have to be in a specific location, sitting in front of my computer at a certain time, waiting for someone to call. I'll get through that email some stage Sunday night, and then whenever I'm ready on Monday, I can get around and respond to it. So just trying to take out those limitations of being in a certain place and being stuck to the certain time to do things. So there are my kind of things I try not to negotiate on when making decisions.
Gotcha. All right. So what are you currently doing training and nutrition wise right now?
Yeah, so I've just this past weekend competed in a powerlifting meet, which went a bit of a disaster compared to what I was planned. The lead up to it went really, really well. Had some really good training blocks behind me, and I was looking at some pretty big PRs. I mean, I'd been doing sets of doubles at something that would have probably been a bigger total in my weight class at the weekend, but just a few things didn't go right. Probably tried to cut a bit too much weight, etc. But nevertheless, next time. So at the moment, I'm planning on competing again around February 2017. And so at the moment, training is just going to get back into a high volume block, work on some more work capacity. And so then nutrition wise, probably for the next 8 weeks, I'm going to be in a kind of a fat loss phase, just leaning out a bit. And then following from that, it'll probably be a solid 5-6 months of just gaining weight up from there.
Perfect. Nice.
Right.
What do you like to do for fun? And don't hold back on us.
Really, my stuff for fun is pretty simple. I love training and just being around the gym in general, hanging out and spending time with my girlfriend, just going for food with friends, having a few drinks with friends on the odd occasion, stuff like that, watching sports. Very, very simple, nothing too crazy that I'm doing on a daily basis. So just any easygoing stuff that's kind of stress-free is good with me.
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
All right, Danny. So we're writing a new book titled The New Era of Fitness. Do you think, looking back a decade ago, that we're in a new era of fitness? If so, why?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot has changed. And the couple of the biggest things I probably see now is, one, there's a lot of places that are focusing more on the community-based aspect, which I think is a really positive move in general, which is probably something that's been, in many ways, at least on the gym side and the, say, strength and conditioning facilities, is a lot to do with CrossFit. Yes. Whether people like CrossFit or don't like CrossFit, there's a lot to be that they've done well that has kind of transferred across. One of them being that community aspect of people being in groups where they know people, are expecting to see people at certain times. And I think that is is a much more successful model than people trying to go it alone, maybe in a bigger commercial setting in general. So if people aren't going to do that, they can obviously find support and networks in different ways. Similarly with another thing CrossFit has been really useful for, which I think things like Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting has benefited from, is people starting to see strength training and things related to that as a way just to be healthy in general and to train for either just to look a bit better, for men and women to lose weight and just to be a bit healthy and to get around life better. They're now seeing modes of strength training as more of a core at that. Whereas in the past, particularly things like powerlifting would have been very niche down to people that are interested in lifting big, heavy weights. Whereas now, especially I know here in Ireland, the raw drug-free powerlifting scene has exploded. The number of women powerlifting has exploded. And like I say, I think CrossFit deserves a decent amount of credit for that. So those two things are big. And then obviously that just the amount of info in general available is widespread. That can be a good and bad thing. But there are three things that probably come to mind first off.
Yeah, and I like that you brought the CrossFit thing up too, because I mean we have clients where we coach and they're doing CrossFit. We don't sit there and try to persuade them to try to do our training program. If they like it, it's like Eric Helm says, it's realistic, enjoyable, and it's flexible. I mean, why not do it? Because I know there used to be big name people where they bash CrossFit, make fun of it, but at the end of the day, if the preference is there, they're working hard, the adherence is high, the results are probably going to come with it. So
yeah, I think CrossFit, the only thing is it's just been a product of its own success, really, in that there's just so many CrossFit gyms and people getting certified that, sure, you can find a ton of coaches that are doing a bad job and programming poorly and unstructured and people getting injured. But I personally know CrossFit coaches that are some of the best strength and conditioning coaches I've seen, and their programming is phenomenal. It's like the level of programming you'd see like elite level S&C facility for a professional sports team. Some of them are that good, and it just happens to be that their sport is CrossFit. And so it's all relative of who you're talking about. And just saying CrossFit is bad or CrossFit is good is idiotic. It's like saying every coach is good or every coach is bad. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Danny, so the last question we ask all of our guests is, what is your definition of living a dynamic lifestyle?
For me, the biggest thing is, no matter like whether the term people want to use is happiness or just enjoying themselves or being stress-free, I think the biggest thing is having some degree of control over what you do. And usually when people are down on themselves or upset or not happy with their lives or unfulfilled, it's because I think they feel some degree of being out of control of how their life is going or out of control over what is happening to them. And they don't know how to get that back. And so I think just being able to set up your life that you're doing stuff that you want to do, and ideally when you want to do it, or having at least some degree over control of what you do is important. And that goes for everything. That goes for the people you hang around with, the hobbies you're involved with, what you spend your spare time doing. The more of those variables you can feel that you are controlling and picking things you want, as opposed to merely being responsive to what other people do, I think is the most important. So trying to take back as much control as you can is that's what probably the best type of lifestyle you can have is being in control of what you do.
Well said.
All right, Danny. So we want to just take a moment to acknowledge you. This is coming from both us twins. We've been a fan of your podcast for 2 years now. We've gotten to know you through email, through Facebook, everything like that. So we just want to say thank you for everything you've done so far to make the industry a better place, bridging the gap between science and application. And you have sure made an impact on Eric and I just through your podcast and interviewing these high-level experts. So I just want to say thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Guys, that means a lot, and you guys are doing an awesome job, like we talked about earlier. The people who spread this information and collate this information for people to use is what we need more of, and you two guys are at the forefront of doing that. So doing an awesome job, and thanks for all the kind words.
Yeah, thanks so much. So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, the easiest place to go is just to go to sigmanutrition.com. There you'll find all the links to the blogs, the podcasts. There's the link to our online coaching. And then if you're any podcast app that people use, if you just type in Sigma Nutrition Radio, you can find the podcast there. And you'll pretty much find me all over social media as well, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Probably if you just search my name, you'll find me pop up somewhere.
No Snapchat yet?
I've been on Snapchat, but
Okay,
I
you
don't
gotta
use
get
it
on
frequently
that.
enough to tell people to do it. So
Gotcha.
I just don't want to waste people's time. You can add me if you want. I'm there. My Snapchat name is Lennon Danny, all the one word. But do not expect regular updates from me.
Gotcha.
Or if they do, they're going to be very poor.
All right, guys. So we'll have all that in the show notes. So Danny, again, thank you so much. We'll also have some pictures of all of our big eyebrows in the show notes as well.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
Awesome,
it.
guys.
All right, Danny.
Thank you,
Thanks so
guys.
much, man. We'll talk soon.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
guys, for tuning in to our video.
Good,
We
and
really,
you're
really
like one of the
appreciate
first
it. And
people
before
who
you guys
have
go, make sure to
ever
subscribe below
pronounced
to
it
our newsletter so
correctly.
you guys can get our free
When I reflect
and new
back
book,
onto
The
myself,
4 Pillars of Becoming Dynamic Within
the
Fitness.
seed that was